Right now, his condition doesn't look good. The last report we got was burns to 85 to 90% of his body. He's being kept under guard here at Grady Hospital right now, being treated in their burn unit. We know that he's an Air Force veteran, but we don't yet know when he served or what his rank was. Police say it was clear he was upset about how the VA had treated him, and he did this in protest. He was alert and talking to officers after that Georgia State patrolman used a fire extinguisher to save him. That's when he was rushed here to Grady.
He's under guard over there for observation. The car is still parked on the west side of the Capitol. The entire Capitol Square is shut down as a crime scene.
A new study from the VA just found that the vast majority of veteran suicides are people who did not have access to VA health benefits. So tonight at 6, we're digging into those numbers and what they mean for our veterans. Reporting live at Grady, Caitlin Ross, 11 Alive News.